During the time of war, for reasons unknown, vampires began to appear frequently in the city. The vampires, having lost their sanity, would attack civilians in a frenzy. To ensure the safety of the public, the government established a special task force, Code Zero. This was a special unit composed of vampire soldiers. An experienced officer, Maeda, was urgently appointed as the leader of Code Zero. Last night, Code Zero captured a vampire named Misaki. Misaki was originally a stage actress, but she had accidentally been injured and died during a rehearsal. However, no one expected that Misaki would resurrect 4 days later and transform into a vampire. Code Zero immediately apprehended her. Maeda was supposed to meet his longtime pen pal, whom he had never met in person, but he had to rush back to assess the situation. When Maeda first saw Misaki, he froze in place, unable to speak. At that moment, Misaki, having become a vampire, had lost all self-awareness. She kept repeating lines from the play she had performed in her past life, but the lines she spoke were eerily familiar to Maeda, because these lines are from the letters exchanged with his beloved, whom he had never met. At this moment Maeda had an ominous premonition. It wasn't until he saw all the information about Misaki that all his speculations were finally confirmed. This woman was the love of his life, the one he had never met. They had made vows of love in their letters, though they had never met face to face. They deeply loved each other. Today was the day they had agreed to meet. But at this moment, Maeda dared not look at Misaki again. Just then, General Hiroki suddenly summoned Maeda to inquire about the vampires. Maeda had no choice but to truthfully disclose all the circumstances. Misaki was a vampire without self-awareness, and could not be enlisted by Code Zero. Upon hearing Maeda's report, Hiroki regretfully stated that she would have to be eliminated. Following this, Hiroki informed Maeda of a piece of news. Based on the clues they had gathered, they had learned that Misaki was the highest-ranking vampire at present. The vampire who infected her was most likely one of the most primitive vampire nobles. Perhaps by following this clue, they could trace the origins of the vampire nobility. Maeda immediately began to investigate the entire incident. He returned to the prison, intending to interrogate Misaki again. However, as he approached, Misaki happened to glance at the transcript Maeda had written by hand. It seemed as if something triggered in her mind. Her gaze fixed on the paper, motionless. She appeared to feel an overwhelming sense of familiarity with Maeda's handwriting, but Maeda, unaware of Misaki's gaze, didn't notice. After failing to gather any useful information from the interrogation, he turned and left. Next, he went to the theater where Misaki had performed. It was here that she had been rehearsing when a large sign fell on her, causing her death. Yet, no one knew why she had transformed into a vampire. While Maeda stood in a daze, a blonde-haired boy suddenly appeared. The boy was a colleague of Misaki's. He told Maeda that Misaki had always been waiting for that man's arrival. She had been rehearsing here all this time, hoping to show her best side to the man in her letters. Maeda felt a sharp pain in his heart. He couldn't bear to hear the boy speak any further. Without another word, he turned and left the theater. But outside the theater, his silhouette inadvertently aligned with the lead male character on the advertisement. It was as though he had become the very character from the play. Yet, now, the female lead would never be able to see him again. Meanwhile, Misaki broke free from the dungeon. She didn't kill anyone. She merely rendered the soldiers incapable of resistance. Misaki then continued rehearsing her favorite play. As she walked toward the city, no one knew where she was going. But perhaps only Maeda knew. Upon hearing the news of Misaki's escape, Maeda immediately guessed where she might be headed. He ordered everyone to stand by, and he alone made his way to a square. This was the place they had promised to meet in their hearts. As the sky began to lighten, Misaki arrived before him. She was still reciting lines from the play. Maeda, however, couldn't bring himself to look her in the eyes. He lacked the power to save Misaki, and now he had to personally end the life of the one he loved most. He drew his knife, but Misaki gently placed her hand over his. At that moment, Misaki recognized him as the man she had longed for. Although she had lost all self-awareness, the one thing she clearly remembered was the promise she had made with Maeda in her final moments of life. She told Maeda, "Your face is exactly how I imagined it." She wished she could kiss him, but it was already too late. In the vast square, only a large vampire mark remained. Later, Maeda was promoted, But the story of the vampires was just the tip of the iceberg. An even greater conspiracy was waiting for him. A man fell in love with a vampire who was 100 years older than him. For her, he too became a vampire. Together, they were forced to hunt the city's citizens in order to survive. However, with the appearance of Code Zero, they had no choice but to rely on the black market to buy blood to sustain their lives. But the blood bags they bought caused them to go into a frenzy and lose all reason, so they decided to hunt humans one last time, and then leave the city. But before they could begin hunting the citizens, Code Zero, which was responsible for hunting vampires, had already tracked them down. Maeda gathered the strongest members of Code Zero, which included the A-level vampire Shutaro, the vampire scientist Takeshi, Suwa, who always wore a mask to control his thirst for blood, and Yamagami, though Yamagami's abilities were limited. His loyalty to Code Zero was unwavering. He was Maeda's best friend. They are vampires retaining human consciousness. Once everyone had arrived, Takeshi took out 2 vials of blood. This was blood that had been treated with sodium citrate to prevent clotting, a type of vampire food sold on the black market. By following this trade route, Code Zero could uncover the vampires hiding in the shadows. They then proceeded to the black market and found a store that specialized in selling blood to vampires. However, the store owner, Shinosuke, was unwilling to betray his customers because the store had been open for over 1,000 years, relying on its reputation. Yet, because Shinosuke was human, Code Zero had no means of coercing him. But Shinosuke told them that a new group had recently appeared in the market. These people, whose origins were unknown, were selling blood that contained substances that drove vampires into a frenzy. Shinosuke was more than willing to provide them with information to deal with his competitors. He then handed Maeda a small vial of fresh blood. This was the type of blood most vampires consumed. Based on this information, Maeda ordered his team to search through the city's trash cans, hoping to find discarded blood vials, and, with them, the hidden vampires. After 3 full days of searching, they finally found an empty blood vial in a residential area. Maeda immediately gave the order to take action. That very night, the team surrounded the house of the vampire couple. Suku was the first to break into the house, but to his surprise, the vampire couple had already prepared for the attack. The female vampire lunged at Suku, and in the moment he fell, the vampire couple turned and fled. In the blink of an eye, the couple had reached the bridge and momentarily evaded capture, but the man had had enough of being hunted. He turned and prepared to fight back against Code Zero's team. Without hesitation, he drank the blood from the vial, and then forced his wife to drink from it as well. The couple returned from the bridge, only to encounter A-level vampire Shutaro. Shutaro gave them 2 choices: 1, to join Code Zero and become a part of their team, or 2, to be killed on the spot. However, the man was incredibly confident in his strength. He charged directly at Shutaro, but Shutaro instantly sent the man flying out. In the next moment, Suku appeared and killed the man. As this unfolded, the sky began to rain. The woman fell to her husband's lifeless body. Tears mixed with the rain as they fell. She stared at her husband's body, muttering to herself how much she hated rainy days. Devastated, the woman suddenly lunged at a nearby human soldier, biting into his neck in a fit of rage. She vowed to kill everyone here to avenge her husband. At that moment, Maeda appeared. He slowly drew his katana. The female vampire immediately charged at him. Maeda shoved his right hand into her mouth, and with his other hand, swiftly beheaded her. Maeda had actually lost his right hand in the war long ago, so the vampire only bit into his prosthetic hand. Later, Maeda approached the injured soldier, watching him suffer from the vampire virus. Without hesitation, Maeda took matters into his own hands and ended his suffering. Afterward, Maeda lit a cigarette in the rain, perhaps sharing the female vampire's distaste for rainy days. Maybe Maeda, too, had grown weary of the slaughter. One day, the beautiful geisha, Asuka, received a peculiar customer. Not only did he wear a distinctive cat-faced mask, but when he entered the room, he neither spoke nor played any games with Asuka. Instead, he simply lay on Asuka's lap, closing his eyes to rest. Much like a child, Asuka found him incredibly cute. So curious, she asked him how old he was. Suwa calmly replied he was probably several hundred years old. Asuka then asked him, "Are you the legendary vampire?" Suwa did not hide the truth and told her, "Yes, I am a vampire. At just 15 years old, Asuka was not afraid of Suwa, the vampire. Perhaps she didn't believe his words. Suwa, curious, asked her why she wasn't afraid. Asuka simply replied, "People outside are far more terrifying than vampires." That simple sentence carried with it the pain Asuka had endured over her 15 years. Suwa was not one to comfort others, and Asuka didn't expect him to comfort her. She just took out a hairpin and gave it to Suwa, telling him to return it next time he came, so that they would have a reason to meet again. Suwa reluctantly accepted the hairpin, but to his surprise, Asuka removed Suwa's mask. She told him that she would return the mask to him if he sang a song for her. Regrettably, Suwa couldn't sing. He quickly grabbed the mask back. Perhaps because she was tired, or maybe because Suwa was simply too dull. Asuka fell asleep right there. Suwa sat alone by the window, seemingly a bit lost. If only he could sing. Maybe they could have talked a little longer, but just at that moment, Suwa received news from his companions that they had found a vampire on the streets. Upon hearing this, Suwa immediately rushed over, but they still let the vampire escape. Suwa could only continue searching for clues the next day. For some reason, however, he unconsciously found himself back at the geisha house. He had lived for centuries, and this was the first time he felt the feeling of missing someone. The shopkeeper informed him Asuka had fallen ill and hadn't come to work last night. Upon hearing this, a sense of unease washed over Suwa. He went to the streets, hoping to find any trace of Asuka, but by chance, he saw 3 vampires feeding on a human. In the blink of an eye, Suwa killed all 3 vampires, but when he turned around, he found the person lying on the ground. The person was the last person he wanted to see at that moment. Suwa gently placed the hairpin in Asuka's hand. Asuka softly whispered, "Sing me a song." Suwa placed his hand on her face, and when Asuka finally lost her life, he still never sang a song for her, because Suwa truly didn't know how to sing. He didn't know what love was, but for the first time in centuries, he felt a hollow emptiness in his heart. It was as if he had lost something. At that moment, Takeshi arrived behind Suwa. He looked at the lifeless Asuka and also felt some regret. But then, Suwa suddenly asked Takeshi, "Do you know how to sing? If you do, could you teach me a song?" For the first time, Suwa felt regret. If he had learned to sing earlier, maybe he could have spoken to her a little longer. Yuko's husband, Yamagami, tragically passed away on the battlefield. Since that day, she has spent every day at home, knitting sweaters. Every time she sees her husband's belongings, she becomes lost in memories. She would stand in front of his photo for hours, gazing at it as the afternoon slipped by. But what Yuko didn't know was that her husband, Yamagami, hadn't died. Instead, he had become a vampire and joined Code Zero due to confidentiality agreements. Yamagami and his wife, despite living in the same city, were unable to meet. Yamagami, however, had always longed to see his wife once more, but as a vampire, he could only venture out at night. Even just watching his wife from afar seemed like an impossible wish. One night, Yamagami, along with Shutaro, was on a mission to track down the group secretly selling blood to vampires. But their mission coincided with the annual festival. It was said that anyone who visited the temple on this day would receive blessings from the gods. Walking down the bustling street, Yamagami couldn't help but remember how, every year on this day, he would bring his wife to the temple to pray together. Sadly, all of that was now in the past. Shutaro seemed to notice the sadness in Yamagami, so he dragged him to play a prank on 2 children. As the children looked at them in confusion, Shutaro quickly grabbed Yamagami by the collar and used the vampire's special ability to teleport them to the roof. The children, believing they had encountered a ghost, were so frightened that they turned and ran to find their mother. Shutaro, watching the scene, couldn't help but smile with amusement. But this gave him an idea. If they used the same method to let Yamagami catch a glimpse of his wife, perhaps Yuko would mistake him for a ghost. Yamagami hesitated upon hearing this idea, but just then, he saw Yuko in the distance. Shutaro didn't give him a chance to hesitate any longer. He pulled Yamagami and teleported him to the riverbank. Standing there, watching Yuko's back, Yamagami finally stopped hesitating. He walked up to his wife. Yuko was shocked to see him, but she quickly calmed down. She thought it was just a dream, because she had the same dream every night. Yuko began telling Yamagami that she kept his favorite piano clean every day, and she would sit on his favorite chair, knitting sweaters. She also cleaned his portrait every day, When Yamagami heard this, he could no longer control his emotions. He wanted Yuko to find a good man and remarry, to start a new life, but Yuko firmly told him, "I only belong to you. You wait for me in heaven." Hearing these words, Yamagami's heart felt as though it were being torn apart. Yuko then made her final request. She asked Yamagami to appear in her dreams more often. Just like today, Yamagami was left speechless. He could only choke up and promise her. Then, he disappeared from Yuko's sight. Yamagami told Shutaro, "I will need to trouble you more in the future, perhaps in this peculiar parting between life and death." The most painful thing is not just Yuko alone. As a vampire, Yamagami has transcended life and death, but cannot avoid the pain of separation. The only thing he can do is hope that they will meet again in heaven in the future.